We are now on lesson 2 of chapter 1, and these are going to be solving two-step equations. Here's a reminder about our rules. You should have written this down yesterday, so don't go ahead and write it again today. That would be a waste of time. I'm just going to go over them very quickly. So the first thing that we're going to do is separate the equation at the equal sign. Then we're going to combine like terms on both sides. Then we're going to work with our addition or subtraction first, and you're doing the opposite to both sides. Then you are asking yourself what's happening with the multiplication or division, and you're doing the opposite to both sides. With the one-step equations that we were doing yesterday, it was one or the other. Since we're working with two-step equations today, that means that we're going to have both of those in there. So we have to do the addition subtraction first, and then the multiplication or division second. So I've got a few two-step equations for you here. So let's try this first one first. So first thing I should always do is draw my line at the equal sign. That separates it. So I've got the left side of the equation and the right side of the equation, because whatever I do to one side of the equation, I should do to the other. I'm looking at this left side because that's where my variable is. And I should simplify both sides, but both sides are already simplified as far as they will go down. We'll get to those kinds of problems later. Next, I'm going to be doing addition or subtraction to both sides. So looking at the side with the variable, I circled my variable so I can see that and identify it quicker. I'm looking for what's being added or subtracted to my variable. So if I'm looking at this 1.5, it is right next to that x, which means there's multiplication happening between those two. So I know it's not going to be that 1.5. Over here, it says plus 15. So once you have it simplified down so it looks to something like this, it's going to be whatever number that doesn't have the variable on it that you're going to be moving over to the other side. That's how you can easily identify the addition or subtraction. So right now it says plus 15, so I know that I have a positive 15 on the left side. So if I take away 15, or if I subtract, do the inverse operation, that goes away, and we're left with 5x, or 1.5x. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So since I took away 15 on the left, I'm taking away 15 on the right. And when I do that, I get 9. Now it's down to a one-step equation. We just have multiplication and division left because we got rid of the addition and subtraction. So I see that I have a 1.5 times x. So since they're written next to each other, I know that that's going to be multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the opposite, which is divide. So I have my fraction bar that represents my division by 1.5. When I divide by 1.5, that cancels each other out because 1.5 divided by 1.5, if you put it in your calculator, equals a 1. 1 times x is going to give us an x. On the right side, whatever I did to the left side, I have to do the right side. So I'm going to divide by 1.5 on this right side. I would recommend just doing that in your calculator because it makes it so much easier. When you do that, you should get a 6. And that's going to be our answer. We can double check it. So instead of writing an x, I'm going to be writing a 6. Whenever I substitute something back in, it's a good idea to put it in parentheses. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm writing 1.5 times 6 plus 15. And that should equal 24 at the end. So all I'm going to do in my calculator, I'm typing 1.5 times 6, and I get 9. And I still have that plus 15. And then I'm going to do 9 plus 15, which gives me my 24. Since the left side equals the right side, I can actually say 24 equals 24 because it's true. I know that I did it correctly, so I know that that answer is correct. Let's move on to problem 2. So for this one, first thing I should always do is draw my line, and then I always like to circle my variable. Next, I'm going to check to make sure that nothing needs simplified, and in this case, nothing does. So I'm going to move on to step number 3, which is my addition or subtraction to both sides. So like I said before, if it's multiplied or divided by your variable, that's going to be your multiplication or division. So we can see that these two are kind of grouped together with that division. So I know that this 2 right here is being divided. Then we have a subtraction sign and then another 2. So I know that this 2 is being subtracted from my variable a. Since it's being subtracted, I'm going to have to add back in a 2 to get that to equal 0 and go away. I'm still left with a over 2 on the right side. On the left side, I can't just bring down that 5. I have to do what I did over on the right side. And so since I added 2 on the right, I have to add 2 on the left, which is going to give me a 7. Now it's down to a one-step equation. I can see that we have division here. The inverse operation of division is multiplication. So the opposite of division is multiplication. So I'm going to be multiplying by 2. And I know that that's the opposite, so I know that they're going to cancel each other out. And that's going to leave me with just an a. And that was our goal. Our goal is to get that variable by itself, isolate the variable. And so since I multiplied by 2 on the right, I should be multiplying by 2 on the left as well. Because whatever I do to one side, I should do to the other. 2 times 7 is going to give me a 14. And so I get a equals 14 because we can always flip the two expressions on for the equation. So I know that a equals 14. Again, we can always double check ourselves. So I'm going to rewrite the equation and I'm going to substitute in 14 instead of writing an a for my variable. So when I'm solving this problem, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is simplifying my division. So 14 divided by 2 gives me a 7, and I still have the minus 2. 7 minus 2 gives me a 5. Since at the end I got 5 equals 5, I know that's a true statement, so my answer is correct. Now I want you to try these two problems. Pause the screen now, and I'll give you your answers in a second. And these are your two answers. So for number 1, you should have gotten x equals 2, and for number 2, you should have gotten y equals 6. Now we're to a point where we're going to actually be combining like terms. So we start off these problems the exact same way with drawing our line. Ooh, that was a really rough line. We draw our line, and then this time, since we have two variables, we have to combine them before we can do anything else. So I can see that these two are going to be like terms. So what I'm going to be doing is 8x minus 6x, and that gives me 2x. So the x is kind of like its last name. It tells us that we can combine those two, and we're just going to keep our x. We're also going to keep the rest of the problem the exact same because we didn't do anything to change it. And now we're down to a two-step equation. So I have my variable right here, which means that I'm going to be working with that left side. I have to do my addition subtraction first. I can see that that 25 is being subtracted. So we've got a negative 25. I have to add 25 in order to get that back to 0. Because remember, my end goal is to get x equals some number. When I do that, I get 2x equals, and we still have to add 25, because whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Negative 35 plus 25 is going to leave me with a negative 10. And then we're going to move on to our step 4, which is multiplication or division. I know that since there's no sign written here that this is going to be multiplication, so that means I have to do division. 2 divided by 2 gives me a 1. X times 1 is just x, which was our goal, and we've gotten there. Now I have to do negative 10 divided by 2, which gives me a negative 5. And that's going to be my final answer. I can go back and double check myself. For time's sake, I'm not going to do that, but just substitute negative 5 in for both of those x's up there. Simplify that left side and you should get negative 35. Let's try number 2 together. So for number 2, again, started off the same way, drawing that line. We're going to check to make sure the left side and the right side is both simplified, and I know it's not. Because I have 2 n's on this left side and then 1 constant. And so this 1 constant can just be written down again as a plus 15, but I'm going to have to combine those 2 n's together. So, like I said before, n is just kind of like a last name. It's a title for it. And so I know that it's going to have an n at the end. So right now I'm just going to focus on those numbers. I have negative 4 minus 8. I know that I'm going to KCO it. That's what I called it for my 7th graders last year. I think Mr. Hebert says KCF as keep, change, flip. Mine's just keep, change, opposite. So we're keeping our first number of negative 4. We're changing that subtraction to addition. And then the opposite of a positive 8 is going to be a negative 8. So we've got negative 4 plus negative 8, which is going to give me a negative 12. On the right side, I can see that this is also not simplified because we've got 2 numbers that are like terms. So I can do 23 minus 2 and get 21. Now it's down to a 2-step equation. So the first thing that we're going to do once we get it down to a 2-step equation is we're going to be taking care of our addition subtraction first. So there's my variable n. 15 is being added to the n. So we are at a positive 15. So if I do a negative 15, that's going to bring me down to 0. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do it to the other side. And so since I subtracted 15 over here, I've got to subtract 15 over there. On that left side, I still have my negative 12n. On the right side, I've got 21 minus 15, which is going to give me a 6. Now I'm down to step 4, which is dealing with my multiplication or division. Since there's no symbol between there, I know that that's going to be multiplication, so I'm going to be dividing by negative 12. Make sure that you divide by that negative because we want to get rid of that negative, because our goal at the very end is to get n by itself, and we want a positive n. I know a negative divided by a negative is going to give me that positive, and so that cancels that out. 1 times n is n. Over here, I can't do anything to that fraction to make it into a whole number, but I can simplify it. I can divide both of those by 6, and I get negative 1/2. And so I know that n equals negative 1/2. Again, for time's sake, I'm not going to plug it in, but you can always substitute that number in and you should get what simplifies to 21 on both sides. Now we're going to be combining like terms using our angle sum theorem. So I know that the sum of my triangle should be equal to 180. So the angle sum theorem, if you remember from yesterday, is where we add up all these angles and it equals, in a triangle's case, 180. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to write each of these 3 angle measurements over here and I'm just going to add them together. So we have m plus 2m plus m plus 10, and that equals 180. Now we're just going to have to combine like terms. I see 3 m's over on the left side, so I'm going to add each of those 3 terms together. So if you remember from before, we can always throw a 1 in front because 1 times m is just m. I can throw a 1 in front of there too, or as well. And then I'm taking 1 plus 2 plus 1, which gives me 4, and then keep the last name of m. I didn't do anything to that 10, so it's going to stay 10. And I didn't do anything to the right side, so that stays 180. Now we're down to a 2-step equation. So we're going to draw our line, and we're going to circle our variable, and then we're going to do our addition subtraction. That 10 is being added to the variable, so we're going to have to do the inverse, which is subtraction. When we subtract, we get 170, and we're still left with 4m. Now I'm left with multiplication and division. So I can see that there's multiplication happening there, so I'm going to do the opposite, which is division. So I'm dividing by 4 on each side. When I divide by 4, that goes away because it just divides down to a 1. 1 times m is just m. On the right side, I just threw that in my calculator and got 42.5. Since I'm working with angles of a triangle, I know that it's going to be in degrees. And so that's going to be my final answer. Again, you can plug it in and check. I'm moving on for time's sake. Now I want you to try these 2 problems. So pause the video, try them both, and remember that this means that it's a right angle and it's 90 degrees. So you have just the number 90 degrees for that, and you're going to be solving for your variable t. Pause the video now and check your answers in a second. And here are your answers. So for number 1, you should have gotten n equals 1. And for number 2, you should have gotten 26.5 degrees. Last thing we're going to talk about is the distributive property. So for that distributive property, hopefully you remember it from 7th grade. But if you don't, what you're looking for is a couple of numbers in parentheses, like this 1 minus negative 5x is here. And then you're looking for multiplication between a number on the outside and that parentheses set. Since there's no symbol right here, I know that this is going to be multiplication. The distributive property is telling us to distribute out that number. So distribute means pass out. So if I had a bunch of candy, I could distribute that candy to all of you, which means everybody gets a piece of candy. And that's what you're doing to this too. Everybody on the inside gets a little bit of that too. Since it's multiplication, you're multiplying it. So we've got 2 times 1, which is going to give us a 2, and then 2 times negative 5x, or subtract 5x, which is going to give us a 10x. So we've got 2 minus 10x when we distribute that out. And then you're just writing down the rest of the problem. So that's going to be another thing that you have to do to simplify it down if I give it to you. From there, we draw our line, and we're going to combine our like terms. I can see on this left side that I've got 1 term there and 1 term there that are alike. This is a positive 2 and a positive 4. So 2 plus 4 gives me a 6. I've still got this negative 10x because I can KCO that, and now you can see that negative sign. And so I've got negative 10x, and this was a positive 6. So I'm going to say plus 6. And then bring down your 8. Now we're down to a 2-step equation. So we have to do our addition subtraction first. So I'm going to be subtracting 6 because our goal is to get rid of it. So if I subtract 6, that's going to bring me down to a 0 on the left. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I have to do 8 minus 6, which is going to give me a 2. From there, I am going to see that there is multiplication happening between our negative 10 and our x, which means that we have to do division because we have to do the opposite. So we're going to divide by negative 10 on both sides. That cancels out and leaves us with our x, which was our goal. We wanted to isolate that variable. 2 divided by 10 I can't do, but I can simplify that fraction to 1/5. And don't forget your negative sign because that carries over. And that should be my final answer. I've showed you how to check your answer, so I'm not going to do it again for time's sake, but just take that negative 1/5 and substitute it in for your x and see what you get. When you finish, you should get 8 because that's what the right side equals. I'm going to do the second problem now. Again, I see some distribution, so I have to pass out that negative 3 to everything that's inside those parentheses. So I've got negative 3 times x, which is going to give me negative 3x. I also have negative 3 times a positive 2, because there's a plus sign out front, and that's going to give me a negative 6. So I can either write that as plus negative 6 or just subtract 6. So I'm going to do plus negative 6. And then I'm just going to carry down the rest of the problem. So plus 5x equals a negative 9. Now that my distribution is done, I can move on to combining my like terms. So I see that this negative 3 has an x and this positive 5 has an x. So I'm going to put those two together. So I'm taking negative 3 plus 5, which is going to give me a positive 2x, and then I've still got my plus negative 6. And that still equals negative 9. Now we're down to a two-step equation. We're going to be doing our addition subtraction first. So I see that my variable's on that left side. So I'm going to be looking for my addition subtraction on that left side, and I see an add negative 6. How do I get that to a 0? I have to add a positive 6 because those two will cancel each other out. Whatever I do to the left side, I should do to the right side. So I've got a negative 9 plus 6, which is going to give me a negative 3. Now I'm left with a one-step equation, which is negative 2x minus 3. So I'm going to be doing the opposite of multiplication, which is going to be division, which cancels that out. And we're left with x equals, can't simplify that fraction. I could change it to a proper fraction if I want, but I'm not that concerned about it. So I'm just going to leave it as an improper fraction. If I wanted to change it to a proper fraction, I would say that 2 goes into 3 one time. And so I've got a 1 out front, and then my remainder is 1. So that's going to be equal to negative 1/2, 1 and 1/2. And that would be my final answer down there. So I would accept either answer. I would just recommend keeping it as an improper fraction because putting it into a proper fraction is going to be more work for you. Now I want you to try this problem on your own. Remember to distribute. I'll give you a little bit of a hint on this first problem. You should be distributing this number right here to every single thing in the middle, so both of those terms there. Once you distribute, combine your like terms, and then you've got a two-step equation to solve. So try this problem, pause the video, and check your answer when you're done. So for my answer, I got d equals negative 1, And this is my check part over here. So this is me checking my answer because I had room this time. And since I paused the video, it didn't take up any more time. So I got the 0.5 equals 0.5 at the very end. So I know that this answer is correct. And the last thing you have to do is some homework problems. So you're on page 14 in your textbook, and you're doing every single problem, numbers 3 through 11. So you have several problems to do, not just 3 and 11, it's 3 through 11. So make sure you get all of those problems done. If you have any questions, please send me an email.